Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our Translanguaging and Transsemiotising TLTS Research Group Seminar Series. Today, we will make history because for the first time in our channel, we have so many wonderful scholars with us because they are the authors, the editors of the two big volumes in the Routledge book series titled Multilingual Learning in Sub-Saharan Africa. So I'd like to first introduce the wonderful editors, Dr. Elizabeth Erling and Dr. Colin Reilly, and then they will introduce their authors and their presentation order. But before that, I'd like to introduce our student host and our postdoc host, Dr. Chinhua Chen and Phoebe Siu and Dr. Chung Hong. Chung Hong, are you there? Chung Hong is going to be Dr. Chung Hong New. Okay, so and Phoebe will quickly introduce us to the palette that we are using and also the lucky draw. We will have a lucky draw. So Phoebe, over to you quickly.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And Chinhua, would you mind sharing the Padlet's post on the screen for the public audience to leave us messages during the webinar? And within this 1 hour live streaming also, whenever you listen to some chapter-based introduction and presentation about the new book, you are invited to give us messages or give the presenter some feedback. Then they will read your Padlet's post. And it can be anonymous or with your name if you prefer further communication. And apart from this, we have prepared very special lucky draw tonight or in your daytime. And Chinhua, would you mind sharing the Google form as well?
Yeah, I've shared the Google form in the chat.
The Excel form is very direct and simple. You just need to fill in your preferred name, email address, and also your research group or research interest if preferred. Then we will add your names into the final lucky draw at the end of the book webinar, and we will announce the results in front of you as well. So I will pass back the time to the host. Thank you.
The price of the lucky draw is, what is it?
Yeah, sorry. I'm going to introduce the price of the lucky draw will be the new book we introduced today. And thanks for joining us, and special thanks for the editors and authors as well for the generosity.
Okay, so over to you, the editors, Beth and Colin. Okay. Beth?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I couldn't do two things at once. So thank you so much. This is just very exciting, really a delight to be here. Thank you, Angel and Christiane, the editors of this series, who have been so open and to giving such a big space to multilingual education in Sub-Saharan Africa. We haven't, I think, had this much space within an international published series in education in this area. So this is really quite exciting. It's exciting as well because this was a big project. It started a long time ago. Just a little backstory. Colin Reilly organized the Ball Symposium at some point with me and John Clegg and some others. And that got us talking about how much work, how much amazing work was going on in different pockets in Sub-Saharan Africa around multilingual learning. And so we had the idea to somehow collect that in a space. And so we had the idea for this book project. I bugged John Clegg to join me. I think I asked him 3 times and to get him on board because he's done so much important work over the decades in terms of language supportive pedagogy in Sub-Saharan Africa. And Casmir Rubagumya, who's not here today, has been working in Tanzania since the 80s and 90s in this area. For the second volume, we pulled Feliciana Chimbotane on board, who's here with us as well today. And so we've been working for years on these two collections. And the first one came out right in COVID, where I think it just wasn't a great time for a lot of us. And so we've never had the chance to celebrate it. And so finally now, with the second volume coming out as well, we thought, okay, let's celebrate them both together. And so I feel quite emotional having all of you here. So that's really quite wonderful. And just to say that this is a great series, a collection about language and content integrated teaching and plurilingual education. We have another volume coming out. We that kind of also about multilingual learning in South Asia, and that will be coming out soon. So also there's a January sale with Routledge. The books are 20% off. And again, we'll be giving away a free version of both books at the end today. So just to say, I'm going to talk very briefly about what you'll be able to find in Volume 1, which focuses more on pedagogical aspects. So we've got a really great introduction that introduces us to the whole topic of and history of multilingual learning in Sub-Saharan Africa, language policies, and how. So in many sub-Saharan contexts, you have mother tongue learning in the early stages of primary education, and the extent to which this works. We've got some papers talking about this state of the art in research here. And Leila Shbruda is going to be presenting her paper on this in a little bit, as well as Justin Salim. And you'll be hearing a lot from these authors as we go. Somebody who's not here today is Carol Bloch, and that's a great chapter on multilingual education in the early years, where they're doing great things in a program in South Africa in early literacy. Colleagues from SEAL presented work that they were doing in Cameroon and Kenya. And there's two chapters by John Clegg and Lizzie Milligan, who are here today, where they talk about multilingual and language supported materials, as well as some of the work that has been happening in Tanzania in science education, language supported science education there. In this volume also pulls a little bit on some of the global north-based translanguaging research from the translanguaging CUNY people in New York with Ivana Espinay and colleagues. And very interestingly, colleagues like Alexandra Holland and Kefa Obiri, as well as Monica Lawo, who we'll hear from, are working with these paradigms in the global south. So it's very interesting to see how these translanguaging pedagogies are being used in the global north and south. And Cornelius Galera is going to talk to us about his book projects in multilingual education in Uganda. And we are going to close it today with Angeline talking about this state of the art. I'm going to pass over now what I wanted to say is that what I think is a very special feature of Volume 1 is this description of what language supportive pedagogy is, how can we enact it, where is it working? And so what we've really tried to focus on are things that are working and these pockets of possibility and good practice that are happening in isolated places and learning from them despite all of the challenges. Okay, so I want to hand over, I think, to Feliciano with this slide.
Thank you, Beth. It's a pleasure to be part of this wonderful international team. As shown on the screen, Volume 2 focuses more on assessment, ideology, and policy. these two volumes we are presenting today go some way in addressing the underrepresentation in international publications on research in this area. Volume 2, with the title Multilingual Learning, Assessment, Ideologies, and Policies in Sub-Saharan Africa, edited by Reilly, Clegg, Rubagumya, and Erling, was set to explore the persistence from colonial languages and monolingual approaches in education, despite the proven effectiveness of multilingual pedagogies, and delves into the reasons behind their underutilization. Focusing on assessment, ideology, and policy, the chapters in this volume offer insights into to navigate contemporary constraints and challenge monolingual discourse hindering multilingual education in Africa and beyond. The hope is that this discursive and legislative openness to multilingualism and multilingual education leads to effective practices of multilingualism and multilingual education. In our view, and drawing on Stroud and Keford 2021, Africans should capitalize on their multilingualism as a mode of engaging with difference as the process of ordering encounters linguistically. That is to say, multilingualism should be adopted as a method and a practice of conviviality and the coexistence in difference. The contributions in this volume show that Sub-Saharan Africa, where multilingualism has been a norm rather than an exception, has a lot to share with global movements such as the Northwest Multilingual Turn, as per May 2014, including in terms of theory and practice of multilingual pedagogies and multilanguaging. Thank you very much. Over to you, Colin.
Thanks, Feliciano. So here is the table of contents for volume 2. So as in volume 1, what we have here is a mixture of chapters and then smaller, kind of more reflective vignettes. And in our introduction chapter, we discuss many of the topics which Feliciano just presented. So particularly thinking about how work and ideas around decolonization are relevant when we're approaching multilingual education. Then after our introduction, we have 17 wonderful contributions from our authors, and we've got a wide range of country contexts being represented here, which include Gambia, Ghana, Kenya, Malawi, Mali, Mozambique, Namibia, Nigeria, Rwanda, Senegal, Tanzania, and Zambia. So really we're addressing contexts primarily in which English, French, and Portuguese are the dominant mediums of education after early years schooling in an African language. As in volume 1, we also have contributions which focus on contexts outside of Africa. So in this case, the USA and Finland, to bring attention to the ways in which these issues within multilingualism and education are interlinked and common across the globe. So the volume here is presented in 3 main sections. So part 1 is on assessment, and we've got 5 contributions which discuss issues around multilingual assessment, thinking about how multilingual assessment can actually be developed and what effective strategies are towards implementation. In part 2, we're thinking about attitudes and community initiatives. So in this section, we've got 5 contributions which highlight the importance of language attitudes and language ideologies in understanding how to most effectively implement multilingual pedagogies. And then the final section is a focus on policy. So in this section, we're thinking about how language policy operates and how it's experienced. And we've got 7 contributions here which discuss how language and education policies are developed and implemented, how this can be made more effective. So I think now we can stop with the introduction to the volume and get to the good bit, which is hearing from all of the authors. So I'll just pass on now to the first author we'll hear from, so Leila Schroeder, to talk about our chapter.
Thank you, Colin. We studied the research evidence available on programs featuring some kind of L1 medium instruction in the context of mother tongue-based MLE. Since we know already that the strength of any bilingual or multilingual program is in its long-term effects upon learners, we examined the models and evaluated the outcomes that parents and learners themselves actually want in Africa by asking what MLE models give speakers of minority or indigenous languages equal access to education. In other words, what features of African MLE programs open doors for learners to eventually enter secondary schools and succeed? So equal access to higher education. We identified over 50 studies and assessed them for evidence of a long-term effect on children's academic success, resulting in equal access to higher education in an L2. Sometimes our evidence came from exam scores, and in other countries, it came from dropout rates or entry, numbers of people entering secondary schools or universities. We then identified features that were associated with those long-term successes or features that were completely lacking, therefore leading to failures long-term for multilingual education. So you see on this chart here, years of L1 medium instruction in schools across a curriculum. And next, another important factor was the amount of teacher training and the kind of teacher training that brought about success. Textbooks in the L1 for all subjects being important actually for long-term success. L1 reading taught for a minimum of 4 years, and oral L2 skills development for all subjects. How was that done? And last, is the L1 used for examinations? Because that affects the value of L1 usage for teachers. That's it for me. Am I supposed to introduce the next person? Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Deutschmann.
Thank you very much. I'm also very privileged to be able this evening to share our chapter with all of you. And I say we because we did the research myself with Professor Max Deutschmann. Unfortunately, he cannot be with us this afternoon for personal reasons. But our research is based on the tiny islands of the Seychelles. If you read the chapter, you'll get to know a bit more about that very small island. But what we have that is very much in common with almost all of the other chapters in the first volume, and probably some of the chapters in the second volume, is the having a second language or third language from a past colonial nation as the medium of instruction in our school. To be precise, in the Seychelles, the main medium of instruction from a very early stage is English, but our mother tongue is Seychelles Creole. So the 5 studies that you can see on the screen were studies that were done to investigate the impact of having English as the medium of instruction from a very early stage at primary school. So the first study, for example, what we did was we looked at policy documents, what they say about English, French, and Seychelles Creole. And what we discovered was that English in the discourse, in the vocabulary, were a lot stronger words that were used associated English with academic success. But Seychelles Creole was used as a language of transition, or a medium for us to learn about our culture. So it wasn't even appreciated that much in the policy documents. And then there was a study on the teachers' attitudes towards using Seychelles Creole or English. And the majority of the teachers in the study prefer to have English as the medium from a very early age, even from like kindergarten, rather than Seychelles Creole. But the main issue we discovered is that the majority of these teachers had Seychelles Creole as first language, and the English wasn't at the level for them to be able to teach it in the way that it was supposed to be. And then we had another study about the students' attitudes towards the languages. And when they are in primary, they prefer Seychelles Creole. As soon as they get to secondary school at the age of 12 onwards, the mother tongue disappears from the curriculum. Seychelles Creole is no longer there. And then their interest in their own mother tongue is lost, especially for reading or writing, and they have a negative attitude towards Seychelles Creole. And another study, the fourth study, was about, we did a quasi-experiment testing students' ability to answer questions in a test in English and in Creole. They did a lot better in Seychelles Creole in the test than in English. And that's at primary level. And finally, the last study, we used the same data from the fourth study to see in which language the students can express their knowledge of the world around them, especially about fisheries, because it was a social studies subject. And again, they were able to express a lot more knowledge in Seychelles Creole than in English. So altogether, the study showed that if the students were allowed to use their first language in education, they would probably do a lot more better and express themselves more than in English. I will only use the next slide. I don't need to use all the slides, Elizabeth. So in the next slide, I'll very briefly mention perhaps what we are proposing for the future. So in this diagram here, basically very quickly, it shows at the top the outside influences that make English so powerful in a small island state like the Seychelles, which is very based on tourism. And parents and teachers, they believe that English is the key to success, the key to the world. And so that puts pressure on Seychelles Creole in the school. Whereas we are proposing to have language support pedagogy, learner-centered pedagogy, alongside English, that would allow students that are growing up in a multilingual context to benefit from all the languages available, like Dr. Chibutan was saying earlier. I'll stop at this stage. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. So, Frederica, if you're ready.
I am ready. I just noticed that I may have animations in my slides. So if I tell you to advance, just click so that my point doesn't get lost. So first of all, let me say I'm one of the authors of the chapter Legitimizing Fluid Multilingual Practice, a Challenge for Formal Education Worldwide with Ibrahim Assisse, and we wrote this chapter while he was visiting me in Helsinki. And so we were able to combine perspectives. We did fieldwork together in Finnish schools and universities, and that we brought together with our experiences in West Africa. Next slide, please. And so why bring these contexts together? Well, our overarching question was whether teaching practices in formal education reflect language use in wider society in all these contexts that we looked at. And our answer was no. And then we went on to discuss, again, looking at both these contexts in the global south and north, and how we can make formal education more open to fluid practice that corresponds to the actual linguistic experiences of learners and is in line with language use in society. And the background is, of course, that even if we have mother tongue-based multilingual education. In Mali, it is based on colonially created standard languages that nobody uses, that the teachers themselves don't know. And in Finland, there's also a recently created standard language that is very, very different from the fluid oral language use. So the practices inside and outside of schools are not aligned. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So we can actually draw on Commons' observation and say that formal education is based on these standard solitudes of languages that keep languages in different schools, different classrooms, and in monolingual language teaching, whereas language use in society doesn't work like that at all. It is based on fluid, intermeshed convivial practice. Next slide, please. So everyday practice is fluidly multilingual, and also importantly, it is dynamic. So you can see on this language silhouette done by a student in Mali that her songrai, which is itself a very fluid, pluricentric language, is still growing. Hence, she, put it as the hair. And the formal education context is completely enabled to cater for this dynamicity for people who are also mobile, change linguistic environments, and have complex linguistic needs. Next slide, please. This is very often perceived as a challenge in formal education systems. So here, in a wonderful master's thesis on multilingual education in Mali, Gindo quotes a former top official in the Ministry of National Education who says that no language can thrive in diversity. So this view that multilingualism always creates a problem, that it requires too many resources, that teachers cannot be trained, is still so pervasive and constitutes a huge obstacle to more inclusive multilingual education. But we really would like to argue very strongly that no language can thrive in isolation. And we need to bring more convivial multilingualism into the classrooms of formal education institutions. And how can we do this? This is our last slide. So please move the slide. So we propose, and this is based on our own practice. So Ibrahima now leads the UNESCO education program in Mali, and I have been working now for 5 years on language independent informal literacy education in southern Senegal, where learners can write their entire repertoire according to their own needs and desires. So our proposals stem from these experiences. And we think first and foremost, we really need more research and also more outreach on multilingual ecologies and on how language acquisition and socialization in multilingual contexts in the global south, but also in the global north really work. We know still very little about this. Second, we think that the empowerment and training of teachers is really important, because if teachers teach one language in standard language, they're in control. They have tools. Somebody tells them what this language looks like. If they are really supposed to empower learners in diverse classrooms, this requires co-learning, this requires sharing knowledge and letting go of this control of teachers. So we need to create spaces for these convivial practices, and that also means creating new visions for assessment. But crucially, we believe that the only way forward to really make multilingual education a success is bring the formal education systems more in line with practices in wider society. Thank you.
Sorry about the fiddling with the slides. We have another section now that's really about...
Hello, everyone.
Go ahead. Makafui and Kimberly will continue talking about classroom practices in Ghana.
Sure. I'm Makafui. Kimberly will give you the second part of this presentation. I will be highlighting some key observations and interesting features of our participating schools and the classrooms. The basis of our papers were observations in 4 Ghanaian schools in 2 districts, 1 model school, 1 low performing school in each district. The classification of the school as the model school Ghana generally indicates a high level of academic performance, a high standard of facilities, and then a strong, well-funded PTA. Generally, our observation tended to match that classification. One interesting exception was that the model schools tended to have much larger class sizes and tended to have more boys than girls per class. In fact, the model schools had generally twice the class sizes of the low-performing schools that we visited. But interestingly, the low-performing schools had more girls than boys per class. So a very interesting dynamic there. The model schools are also part of school systems. All the model schools are part of school systems. Think of something like the UC university system in the US, where you have UCLA, Berkeley, and then 8 other schools across 8 cities in California. Now in District 1, the school is the model school, and it is part of a particular type of school system called the cluster school, which is essentially several schools, usually 4 to 7 schools, that are sharing one large area. They share some facilities and an extended compound, but it depends on the particular configurations of the school. They are essentially distinct schools with their own staff and head teachers sometimes. School 2 is also a cluster school, but with a particular twist. This school is actually 2 schools sharing all the same facilities, which are themselves part of a much larger cluster. And interestingly, this school is also running a shift system. So essentially, the first school starts from 7 a.m. to midday. The second school starts from midday to 5 p.m. And then after 2 weeks, they do a switch over. But they share one head teacher. And then in District 2, we have another model school, School 4, which is more traditional in terms of the school system. But the variation is that all the schools in the school system are in different parts of the same town. School 3 is the most typical of our schools, which is primary, junior high, and then kindergarten. One final observation from my end, we observed lessons from 5 P4 primary 4 classes, 6 primary 5 classes, and then 4 primary 6 classes. 40% of the lessons we observed were English lessons, and the rest are summarized in the table over there. Kimberly will take you through the highlights of the fieldwork in terms of the people we met and their approaches. Thank you.
Thanks, Makafui. Yeah, it's really great to see everybody. Makafui and I have had an opportunity to reflect on all of this data that we collected in Ghana. And it's been really wonderful to look back on that period of field work. We also did 25 interviews. Some were kind of group interviews with more than one person. Some were individual interviews. And these were with people in the education system. And these included district directors of education. Both of these were women. 3 head teachers were women, one man head teacher. 11 women teachers and 3 men teachers, circuit supervisors, 3 men, 1 woman. Many of those were former head teachers, and a human resources director. So it was really interesting to talk to lots of stakeholders in the education system. And we were saying that if we had it to do all over again, it would have been really interesting to talk to parents, because a recurring theme in the interviews was that parents want their children to learn and be taught in English, not local languages. And to me, from a parental point of view, this makes complete sense and is very rational, because the assessment system is in English and access to further and higher education requires English. But it's really interesting to think about exploring that further, parental experiences and expectations of English education or a local language education. And we think the empirical data from this fieldwork continue to be of interest. All the interviews and classroom videos and the photographs of environments and resources. And talking with Makafui this week, it seems the context hasn't changed very much since the time we went there. And we did also want to say that we think the way in which this field work was planned and organized and carried out resulted in this very rich data set. And this was all possible because of the collaboration between Ghanaian and UK researchers. There was very early and ongoing contact with all the participants by Makafui. So when we arrived, they were really ready for us and understood what we were after and the focus of the discussions. And Makafui's knowledge of language and culture and context were absolutely central to this data collection. This wasn't a fixer role or a local guide role. And I really feel strongly that all the participants, especially teachers and also district officials, felt confident to talk openly with us because they knew that their comments were being listened to by someone who would really understand and not misinterpret anything they were saying. And we were also able to observe and analyze this data from our different perspectives, me as an outsider and Makafui as an insider. And we think this is a really effective model for field work. But to replicate it has implications for time and for budget. And we had a lot of time and a fairly generous budget for this kind of field work. But I really wanted to celebrate the collaboration with Makafui in collecting this very, very interesting data. And that's all from us. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. It's great to revisit that. I think we'll continue now with Clyde.
Okay. The previous slide. Previous slide, Elizabeth. That's my, yeah, wonderful, wonderful. So as you can see, I'm going to talk about a language in education context, which hasn't received a lot of attention so far, so namely the Gambian education context. And when I say we, so my name is Clyde Onkano, but I co-authored this chapter with two, I think the right term is two really senior educators, Babukar Bui and Mamadou Jang, who both were really heavily involved in attempts to integrate national languages in education since the noughties. And as you'll see, Mamadou Jang, and I will speak about it towards the end of the presentation, he's been, he's spearheaded the recent development of a new and the first language in education policy. So what do we focus on? We focus on an early parallel biliteracy program, and which prescribes that from grade 1, it was introduced in 2015, and it prescribes that from grade 1 to grade 3, children should receive an equal amount of literacy lessons in one national language, so Jola, Mandinka, Manjaku, Olof, Pular, Sarahule, or Serer, as well as in English. And what we focused on in particular is challenges facing the implementers of this program. As you can see at the bottom of the slide, we identified 4 broad areas of challenges, but we decided to focus on 2 specific areas, so namely beliefs related to language, related to language or multilingualism, about language in education. We also honed in on what we qualified, don't particularly like the word limited, but the expertise, the local expertise in the national languages. So for example, the fact that there are very few studies on Gambian languages, and also the fact that in terms of literacy in the national languages, people who are literate tend to be literate in English and not Gambian languages. Of course, some people use what they know of, about English to write Gambian languages, but that remains, formal literacy remains infrequent. The data we used were 12 interviews with people whose job somehow was relevant to the introduction of the national language literacy lessons, and interviews lasted roughly between 30 minutes to 2 hours sometimes. So I'm going to ask you to move on to the next slide, if that's okay, Elizabeth. So in a section of the chapter, we highlight policy recommendations. But what I'd like to highlight here is that these are based on interviewees' recommendations to policymakers in the interviews. And key recommendations, for example, it included interviewees alluded to the need to plan for the program to be successful, the need to change beliefs about language. One of the presenters early on referred to, for example, to parental opposition to the integration of national languages, and that at the time it was very much relevant, although within the time that I've been researching multilingual education in the Gambia, that seems to have changed because there's been awareness raising campaigns that have taken place in schools. They also allude to the need to develop further the national languages and to address inequalities. So we discuss this in the chapter. And as you can see here, we're using Stroud's work, Stroud's concept of linguistic citizenship, and particularly how he applies it to mother tongue programs in particular. And one of the reasons why we focus on the two areas of challenges I highlighted earlier is because we very much wanted to move beyond what people already know locally about technical linguistic solutions, and that is also fairly well understood in the literature. Next slide, please. And I've already mentioned this. So since the publication of the chapter, things have changed a lot. So in November, the Gambia's first language and education policy was validated. And this policy prescribes that one of the 7 national languages should be used as language of instruction between grade 1 and grade 3. As it stands, the early parallel biliteracy program should be maintained. But as I said at the start, this is very much the fruit of Mamadou Dieng, one of my co-authors' work, which has been with the support of the World Bank, which is the main education donor. And I've got a quote from the chapter here at the bottom of the slide, which is very relevant to what he's grappling with at the moment. So namely, the fact that in contexts where the national languages are rarely read or written, what is required is concerted efforts of both language planning and language-specific literacy instruction. So considering this recent change in language and education policy, that's become even more relevant than we'd anticipated when we started the chapter. Thank you very much. And
Oh, hi. Well, thanks, Clyde. And thanks, everyone. Yeah, it's a really great honor and great pleasure to be presenting as part of this community and publishing together. So the chapter that I'm presenting here focuses on the pedagogical recontextualization of English medium instruction policy in Rwanda. And I'm presenting here a study that's part of my PhD study, which would not have been possible without my Rwandan colleagues, Jean-Claude, Innocent, and Alphonse. Okay, so the slides changed slightly. So the overarching question of the study is at the top there. And I was particularly interested to understand how does this teacher, so a mathematics teacher in a rural government secondary school in Rwanda, how do the teacher and students construct lessons in the context of English medium instruction when English only is the official language policy, and yet in practice in the community beyond the school, English is there, French is there, Kinyarwanda is there, but English is very much a minority language and little used. So I was interested in this question in the context of English, of EMI, but also learner-centered education, another policy hitting classrooms.
So this study is characterized as a critical and ethnographic case study, or a micro-ethnography even, because we focused just on one mathematics class. So teacher and group of students who we followed over 5 months through recording lessons and also through participant observation in school. The study raises major ethical considerations. It's very uncomfortable, and rightly so uncomfortable, as a white European researcher to research in Rwandan schools. And to mitigate this to some extent, certainly working with colleagues, as Kimberly mentioned, was really important, discussing these ethical issues, and also building on colleagues' expertise and relationships to ensure that people were informed and involved in the study as far as possible. It was also really important to position myself in the study as I am, as a learner, but also in this sense as a student. And I think that helped also with the potential power dynamics. Another aspect was the inductive analytical approach. So I wasn't going in there with a model of pedagogy or language developed in Europe or in the global north, but was really going in and through linguistic, ethnographic data collection and analysis, trying to figure out how the lessons were constructed and understood in the teacher and student's own terms. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, so this is a summary of some of the findings in relation to English medium instruction. And this chimes somewhat with the study from Zanzibar, I think. So it was very interesting that both the teacher and students in this study, but also in other studies in Rwanda, used the phrase that the teacher teaches in English, but explains in Kinyarwanda. And this captured in some way the fact that the teacher systematically used English as the language of mathematics. The English that students need to pass exams was consistently presented to them, but he meshed it as part of a flexible, multilingual, but also multimodal repertoire. And by multimodal, I mean the kind of mathematical diagrams that the teacher created on the board, or that often students created as part of a lesson activity I called demonstration, where the teacher would guide students to construct mathematical texts. So using mathematical diagrams and symbols and bridging with English and Kinyarwanda. So the second point there, a key finding that the teacher and students use these multilingual and multimodal linguistic resources to construct and participate in mathematical practices, to access mathematical language, and to communicate mathematical meanings. And this has got really important implications for pedagogical research and also language policy research. And my study was kind of between these two disciplines, because I concluded that if you're going to explore pedagogy, we know that language is central to pedagogy. Language is the building block of pedagogy, but language is far more than verbal language. So we need to, yes, look at different languages, different standard languages holistically, but we also need to extend that to include multimodal forms of communication. And actually, any study of classroom discourse that doesn't do that is risking missing key aspects. For example, students, we found, were very proactive in shaping classroom discourse. Students signaled to the teacher and the teacher responded to the students, but they did it primarily through silences in particular activities where they might be expected to respond verbally. The final point here is really, really important, because while I found huge pedagogical resources in this classroom, tightly focused lessons drawing on a range of pedagogical resources preparing students for these exams. That was the aim of the students. Both the teacher and students were very negative when talking about students' linguistic repertoires. So students described feeling ashamed, lacking confidence in relation to their English. So rather than celebrating an emergent multilingual repertoire, students felt shy, and this inhibited the extent to which they interacted verbally. And it also inhibited the teacher in using some of the verbal activities in the textbook. So activities where students were encouraged to discuss understandings, because they wouldn't have been able to do that in English only. Those activities were avoided. So the main conclusion of the study is that the problem in this context is the monoglossic linguistic ideology in English medium policy as it stands, and that there is considerable linguistic and pedagogical resource to build on if only researchers, policymakers, teacher educators are willing to do so. Thanks very much. Thank you so much, Rachel. Just a note for the comment for the audience. So there was a problem with the Padlet. Apologies for that. I think Phoebe has fixed it or posted a Google Doc where you could put your comments in. And we will attend to those comments at the end. So we're going to move on now to papers that have dealt with, or chapters that have dealt with the development and use of multilingual resources in various African contexts. And we start with Lizzie and John.
Thanks very much. So you'll see from this textbook, which we describe as a typical science textbook in Rwanda, that what is expected of children, so this was in 2016 that we were doing this study, and we were looking at what is expected of children who at that time, grade 4 is when they've just switched into using English as the medium of instruction. And this is the complexity of vocabulary and sentence structure that children are being expected to learn in. And one of the things that John Clegg, my co-author on this, has written a lot about is if you do readability studies to show that actually this is much harder than you would be expecting from a child that had English as their L1. So that was our starting point for a study looking at language supportive textbooks and pedagogy. So next slide, please. And what we did was we developed textbooks. Oh, and the next one, thanks. Is that we developed some textbooks together with textbook writers and illustrators in Rwanda. And what we were aiming to do is develop textbooks that have all different aspects of language supportive pedagogy that I'm sure some other colleagues are going to talk about in a little bit. But I just wanted to particularly highlight two things. One is the use of very simple English, and where there is a term or a word that their children might not know, we included glossaries. And also to note the very short sentence structures, which the authors there thought was incredibly important to help children to understand it. And in our chapter, we go through why we think these sorts of resources are incredibly important in Rwanda and other sub-Saharan African contexts. And we also present the research that we did within this study. And what we thought was the most important part of that research was the quantitative findings. So we did tests with children in control schools and the schools where we were doing the language supported pedagogy and where they were working with these texts. And what we found that at the end of 3 months of using these materials, children that were using them scored 16% better on average than children that weren't. And that was on a test that we designed looking at vocabulary and comprehension. So potentially seeing a real improvement in both accessing the curriculum content and also in developing their language, which we hope if you read the chapter, that's something that you will take from it. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you. A big thank you to Beth and Angel and the whole team. It's a joy to be part of this wonderful conversation. My name is Monica Schenk-Lawo, and my chapter addresses possibilities for engaging translanguaging and multimodality as key resources in supporting authorship and the development of creativity and critical literacies, as well as investment in reading and knowledge production in a multilingual community library in northern Tanzania. Looking back at this chapter, a couple years after reading it, I really see it as an expression of hope, as an articulation of a dream of more equitable and decolonial approaches to education, and indeed as an assertion that alternatives to neoliberal educational models are indeed possible. So at the core of this chapter are the concepts and enactments of translanguaging and multimodality. And of course, these ideas shift. Translanguaging means a different thing in different contexts. This particular context, it's a predominantly Maasai community with Kiswahili as a lingua franca. So it's really drawing on linguistic features of Kimasai, Kiswahili, and English. And of course, translanguaging, which I understand to be inclusive of multimodality, is centrally committed to embracing full linguistic as well as semiotic and cultural and epistemological repertoires. At the core of this work are also the ideas of creativity and critical literacies, which are really two sides of the same coin. Creativity being about playing with possibilities, as well as transgressing established norms. And critical literacies being about engaging with questions of power, questions of whose interests are served by a given text and by the status quo, and then redesigning texts and the world to serve different sets of interests. So key findings that are examined in this 3-year critical, this chapter about a 3-year critical action research. Firstly, it examines how a translanguaging space enabled opportunities to cultivate multilingual authorship of texts broadly conceived, both multilingual and multimodal, as well as of unique meanings and also of alternative futures. This translanguaging space enabled children to claim identities as authors, as well as artists, experts, and teachers, and also enabled them to assert the legitimacy of their own ideas, languages, and life worlds. Secondly, this translanguaging space shifted children's relationships with literacies and supported children to claim authority to intervene in texts and the world, and to understand texts and the world as incomplete and changeable. And thirdly, this translanguaging space supported the centering of local knowledges, including through intergenerational learning opportunities. So on the next slide, I'll take you through a few quick stories to illustrate these findings. So in this multilingual community learning center, we have texts in a variety of languages. And specifically, I found that trilingual books featuring Kimasai, Kiswahili, and English together were particularly generative resources for a boy named Rama. So he would pore over these books for hours, meticulously making connections, comparisons between the languages, using resources from the illustrations to augment meaning making, as well as collaborations with a facilitator and other children. And all of these processes, through all of these processes, meanings were multiplied across languages, modes, and people. And eventually, he decided to author his own trilingual book, a picture of which is in the corner of the slide. And this whole process enabled Rama, through these richly collaborative processes, to position himself as an expert as he intervened in the translations, argued with them, made suggestions for better translations, especially with the Kimasai, and to position himself also as a translator, author, in ways that were absolutely impossible when his vast linguistic repertoire is invisibilized in formal mainstream schooling. Another story on this other side of the page is of a mother, actually, of a library participant in her 40s who saw the amazing work that children were doing authoring these multilingual, multimodal texts in the library and said, I can do this too. So she sat with an elder who told her traditional Maasai stories using Kimasai, and she filled 2 notebooks with stories that she wrote in Kimasai and Kiswahili. Importantly, she had never written or read her dominant language of Kimasai before, and then further developed a few of these stories into books with a youth from the community illustrating. Sadly, this elder has since passed away, but his stories live on in the form of these texts. And this mother also engaged with the children, talking about, it was generative of conversations and interest also with the children in the Community Learning Center, generated community investment in a range of literacy practices, including the centering of local knowledges. So in conclusion, I'd just like to share how this work has continued to evolve since this chapter was published. In addition to continuing to support children to author multilingual, multimodal texts, I've also continued building on similar approaches to collaborate with children as co-ethnographers of their own lives and literacies. So we've been using drawing as well as photography, photo voice, and the creation of multilingual digital texts also to work with researchers as researchers, children, as researchers of aspects of their own worlds. And some of these texts have been published on the African Storybook, which is a good segue, I think, to Cornelius's presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you. Malamwisa Bakagwa. I'm Cornelius Gulere from Uganda, and I'm presenting our paper on creating multilingual resources as part of teacher education in Uganda. This was part of my postdoctoral action research in different parts of Uganda, and my co-teacher Kezabu Lubulwa joined me in writing up this paper. We trained over 400 student teachers to access, create, and use online resources on those sites that you see at the bottom of my presentation. That is African Storybook and Storyweaver. How did we get to the 400 students? These were the classes that I was handling in creative writing for education, bachelor's education, creative writing for Bachelor of Arts, and creative writing for journalism students. It was intended to teach, to create, and to create to teach as an academic coursework in all those 3 areas of the courses at Uganda Christian University and Bishop Willis College in Iganga. This particular research empowered the students to generate knowledge about their own language and also to expand their knowledge of their own subject that they were handling, especially those who were in teaching language. It helped them to understand better as they went on to interact with the communities. Some of them even went to the extent of producing and selling their creations. Those in the journalism class gained some money from selling their articles, creative articles that were able to publish online or in some of the newspapers, while those who created the children's books, some of them were able to sell them. And one student in particular managed to pay his school fees from the coursework production that he made. It was, for us, a promotion of the authors as individuals, as well as the diverse Ugandan languages. You know that we have over 56 indigenous languages in Uganda, and we managed to attain at least 50% of them in the classrooms that this project covered. This, I must say, is a great achievement, especially that in Uganda, although mother tongue is the official language of instruction, there are hardly any readers in the local languages or even trained teachers. So this was an opportunity for the teachers to be and the journalists to be able to take this information out, not only as authors, but also with tangible products, which the community could read and appreciate. This was all done through teamwork, collaboration, and commitment through the language patrons, the evaluators. The rigorous peer review process involved native language users who included cleaners at the university, librarians, gatekeepers, security guards, parents, people in the shops around the university. The students had to go out and look for somebody who spoke their language. And this is how we came up with 26 languages. This is all we could get. The students who were in this university and the majority of the workers fell in 26 linguistic communities. So we had to go by those, and except one who came from Nigeria, she had to find the people in Nigeria to peer review her books, make sure that we only upload those books that have been peer reviewed and the quality has been properly ascertained. We experienced a challenge with Rwanda. The Rwandan language spoken in Uganda is not the Rwandan language spoken in Rwanda. So when we took the books to Rwanda for peer reviewing, they were rejected. And we had to create a section for Ugandan Rwandese language and also a section for Rwandese language. And that is how we could get these books published on Storyweaver and African Storybook. Some of the languages, as you can see there, have been read over and over again. Some language speakers are only beginning to discover that their languages are online, but we have been able to, at least by the create 500 those number of languages, which I'm sure has increased by now. You can see it from Storyweaver. The picture that you have there is some of the books, I think these are in Lusoga. But when you scroll on those sites, especially those that have been approved under Uganda Christian University or Bishop Willis College or Chambogo, you should be able to get some more information about this project. And we are so grateful to the organizations that supported this work, because we believe that it is the way to go in order to go multilingual and bilingual. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cornelius. I think it's the way to go too. They give a wonderful example of how to do more publishing in these languages. We have a short description of a project going on in Kenya with the Aga Khan Institute there at KEFA.
Hi, everybody. I'll start and then I'll hand over to KEFA. I'm Alex Holland. I work with KEFA at the Academy. Apologies if there's background noise. I'm actually at the airport at the moment. It's quite difficult to find a place. KEFA and I work in a group of schools, the Aga Khan Academies, which are in East Africa and South Asia. And Although our schools are in relatively privileged contexts, we run the International Baccalaureate. Around 50% of our students receive some measure of financial aid and around 10% are on full financial aid. So we're committed to meritocratic entry and socioeconomic diversity. And within the academies, we're also committed to bilingual education that develops students as academic users of both English and their national languages. This often presents us a problem problem is a bad word, challenges for many of the reasons that have been outlined in previous talks. Families' preference for English language education as a medium to international education, education overseas later on. And but another challenge we have in trying to deliver the IB primary years curriculum in English and Kiswahili is access to resources. And we worked closely with Erling Chrisfield. We have to give credit to her for her support in the development of our program to solve the resourcing challenge through the use of field trips and guest speakers. And Kefa was our translanguaging teacher at the time, who's now the PYP coordinator at the school. He's going to talk a little bit in the vignette about the ways that we did that. Kefa, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Alex. So as she has just mentioned, we offer a bilingual program in our school. It's an IB PYP. It's an IB World School. So the PYP offers a bilingual program, English and Kiswahili. You may wonder why we chose Kiswahili. Kiswahili is the official language of Kenya, and English is also there are two official languages in Kenya. So we felt that these languages should be treated equally. And now that we also, the aim of the Aga Khan academies is to actually create or develop leaders who are going to solve local problems. There's no better way of bringing that than letting them learn the national language. How are they going to communicate with the people when they come back to lead and solve problems here? So as Alex said, we faced a few challenges, and the major challenge was resourcing. And how did we navigate this? We realized that we have a lot of resources around us because I also had a challenge from someone from Uganda, I think, who felt like there's not much published resources in terms of the local language, which is Kiswahili here. So that was also a challenge, and it's still a challenge we are facing in Kenya. So the only solution we found was to use the local resources we have, including the people around us. So who are some of our support staff, the cleaners, the security guards, and all that. And we also made very much use of the trips, going to local trips. One of the major tourist attractions in Mombasa is Fort Jesus, a Portuguese port that was built in 1490, around there. So there are lots of local people working there. So once we take the students there, they're able to learn a lot. And one thing that we have to do when we are doing this, we have to plan and even communicate with the people that we are going to meet there so that they speak in the target language. Our target language here has to be Kiswahili. And that's one thing that we made sure that most of our trips focus, if we are going to use the local community, then we have to tell them we have to use the focus language here, which is Kiswahili. And one other thing that we have done, we focused on also bilingual assessments. When you look at some of our assessments are bilingual. For example, if there's an assessment, there will be a part where the students are expected to answer in English. And there's also a part where the students will be expected to answer in Kiswahili. So the reason we are doing this is to make sure the languages have equal weight, because as Alex said in the introduction, parents don't, a few years back, the parents didn't view Kiswahili as an important language for the students to learn. So it's very important when we do that. So the students see the languages as being equal. And when we use the local resources, something we also noticed, when we use the local resources, the students are getting more opportunities to see Kiswahili being used outside the classroom, because a few years back, it only used to see Kiswahili in the classroom because they never speak it at home, they never speak it anywhere else. It's only they hear it during the bilingual lessons and the Kiswahili lessons. So by using these local resources, and even when you go to trips and the people there speaking Kiswahili, then the students get to see the use of Kiswahili outside the classroom. We've seen lots of changes. There are no longer more things to do with the negative attitude towards learning Kiswahili as a language. And the profile of the language is now coming up. The students are really putting in an effort to learn both languages, to use them as much as they can. And I think there's lots of positives now.
Thank you so much for bringing up those important points about assessment and ideologies. There was questions about that, and Volume 2 really goes into that, and we have a couple of good questions about multilingual assessment and how to do that. We have a closing note from Angeline.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for all of those presentations, and I wanted to end with a closing note rather than talking about our chapter, because when Beth first suggested the idea of having this book launch, I reflected on kind of the many things that have happened since the volume 1 was first published, and a lot of those have come about partly because of the book. So I explain a little bit. I think the editors, Beth, Colin, Casmir, John, and Feliciano, they've brought together some research, brought together our research and voices within these books. And there's no doubt that these 2 books are going to be a fantastic resource for researchers going forward. And for that, that's enough. Thank you. But the way you went about this, I think we also all value. Editing, I know, is a large amount of work, and at times it can be frustrating. But you have put us in contact with each other. You've connected us together, and this event is just one example of the ways that you have done that. And because of that, there have been new research projects that are already happening. There's new collaborations. And certainly for me, I've been working with Rachel Bowden and with Justin Zalim, who presented today, and as well, which has been great for me. They're fantastic people to work with, and but I have to say that this is not all about making new friends, however much we do enjoy that. Ultimately, the purpose for what we are doing is not even just to produce great research and not even just to kind of share it amongst ourselves. The purpose is to bring about some change, and we all care about this work. We all care about it deeply, because what we see going on is injustice at a massive scale. We're seeing generations of children and young people who are being failed by our education systems because of the language policies. And I'm going to quote a little bit from John Clegg in a personal communication. He describes this as a crime being perpetuated against children who are desperate for an education, and this is occurring right across Sub-Saharan Africa. So what this means is that we have education systems, the language and education policies are working in such a way that we have education systems that, if they were tax systems, we would describe them as regressive. And what I mean by that is they work to multiply the advantage of those children who are already privileged, and then they work to just put extra burdens on those children who are most disadvantaged because of poverty, because they're living in rural areas, because they don't have access to media and resources, or because they're having to work alongside their basic education. And this is something that needs to stop. And I think we all agree it needs to stop. And of course, everyone in this Zoom room and everyone, and also, as well as the people who are watching this on YouTube, you all know this very well, and you all know details of how this works much better than I do through your research, but also through our lived experiences as learners and as teachers, which many of us have been teachers in our previously in schools. So my point is, we have a job of work to do, and we have a job of work to do to realise what we know is possible for all learners. And there's a job of work that we can do through research. So through doing more research, yes, much more research is needed, and particular types of research is needed. And this is something that Rachel Bowden and I have been thinking about and talking about and writing about. We need research that isn't just about the problem and doesn't just describe the problem, but that engages educational professionals in designing curricula. Cornelius Galere gave us such a beautiful example of that today, and a beautiful example of the key role that teacher educators can play as well in doing this. And that's pretty much what the chapter that I wrote with Zawadi Juma and Francis William is about as well. But we also need we need new research collaborations, because actually, although there is a problem with language in education is not the whole answer. So I come from a background actually of being a science educator, and as a science education, I can see so many synergies between the arguments that are being made for multilingual learning and what I know about learning for scientific literacy and what I know about learning science process skills. There's also all sorts of synergies with education that contributes towards sustainability. So we need to be forging new collaborations with people who are working in different types of educational problems, so that language becomes part of solving all sorts of problems and not just a kind of a little area in itself. We also need, of course, to be engaging with advocacy. We need to be changing the terms of the debate. So in the chat, Jason Ho asked a question about how do we find how Jason put it. But he asked a question about how do we win hearts over? We've talked a lot about ideologies and policies and practitioners today, but how do we win their hearts over? I don't know about winning hearts over, but I think, Jason, part of the answer to your question is we need to change the way people talk about these problems. We need to change the terms of the debate. And I think now maybe, at least amongst that kind of weird jet set elite that call themselves the international development community, I think this is a period of opportunity, because the World Bank has very recently started entering into this debate in the last 2 years and saying that we have big problems because children are being expected to learn in languages that they don't know, that are not familiar to them. I know Lizzie Milligan is planning an event in London, which will be about talking to the kind of international policy community. And Rachel and I have also been talking about putting together a policy debate or having some kind of a policy dialogue event. So, for those of you who are in the Zoom room, for those of you who are doing research in this area and think you have something important to say, you now know my name, you know my institution. There aren't very many Angelines at the University of Bristol, and there are even fewer Mbogos. So you can find me easily. Drop me a line if that's something that you'd be interested in. So I'll finish again by saying thank you to all of the editors. What has been achieved is so much greater than just 2 books, fantastic as those books are. So our sincere thanks to you. And
thank you, Angeline. And thank you for bringing up those points. I just wanted to say, these books were dedicated to the children, but also to the policymakers, and with a plea to please take into account what we've been saying for decades. Our books, though, try to take a positive note, and I'll finish with saying what Casmir said, to Tutavika, we will get there. We've got a lot of good things in place. We've got our contacts and each other. The lucky draw is ready, I hear. So I'm going to close my slides and hand over to see if
Phoebe.
Thank you very much, and thanks for all the wonderful presentation and sharing about the themes and book chapters. And thanks so much for all the online participants. I would like to double check, Qinghua, would it be better if you share the screen of the lucky wheel? I gave the link through the meeting chat already.
Yes, I think I can share that screen in here. So
yeah, let's look at the names of the participants through the wheel, then we can click the lucky draw button. Or do you prefer me sharing the screen? I can also do so.
yeah, I mean, yeah, it will be better for you to share the screen because yeah.
So let me try to share screen now. For the audience to look at our lucky draw screen, is it all right to see the spinning wheel? And Qinghua is okay, right?
Yes,
it should
yes.
be showing.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for the friends who have joined the book giveaway lucky draw. And we have around 7 names on the Google form identified. And if you don't mind, I'm going to host the lucky draw, and I'm going to circle rounds. Okay.
We should create some atmosphere.
Trying to click the spin button, and then the winner of the free book will be announced by the system. So are you all ready, the online audience?
So we have 2. Don't forget, we have 2 free books. So the winner of Volume 1.
And on Volume 2, right? So we have 2 free books for 2 lucky stars tonight. And thanks for giving me the privilege to host the spinning. I'm going to spin the wheel now, and the winner will get Volume 1 first, okay? And thanks for the participants' eager response through the Google form. So I'm going to start now. 3, 2, 1, spin. And the system will announce the winner of Volume 1. It's in the margin, but it will announce. Oh, Eric, congratulations. Okay.
So fun.
Wonderful, Volume 1. Okay.
Wonderful.
So I'm remove Eric's name from the wheel now so that the remaining participants will enjoy the equal privilege and opportunity.
There's one more chance, right?
Yes, Volume 2.
Volume 2.
Several times again. Okay, so I'm going to count 3, 2, 1, and then spin. Okay, 3, 2, 1, spin.
Ooh.
Okay, April.
April in Hong Kong.
And then actually April will be the winner of Volume 2. So thank you. Pass back to you, Angel.
Yes, I'd like to thank all the authors and the editors, Feliciano, John, Casmir, Colin, Beth, and also the online audiences. Please remember to give us a like because this will help our channel to get more audiences, and subscribe to our channel. Our channel is translanguaging and transsemiotizing. And I feel so touched by all the work done by this community. I think this is just the beginning. And there are questions in the Google Doc. I think there's one about assessment, the paradox, and the policy advocacy one. Angeline already mentioned that. But assessment seems to be a big issue. I'd like to say that here at the Education U of Hong Kong, I have just got some funding to look at multilingual assessment, to do a project on multilingual assessment. So I might reach out to all of you to join in our project to find out how we can advocate and also actually do multilingual assessment. The project is called Theorizing Plurilingual Assessment. I add theorizing in it because it helps me to get the funding. We do need the theorizing and also the actual advocacy and the actual pedagogical, all kinds of work. Over to you, the editors. You have any final thoughts? And I actually would like to give a chance to our student hosts, Tsinghua, Phoebe, and Chonghong, to ask a question to this really wonderful community of scholars and researchers. Chonghong, you always have a good question to ask. Chonghong is a PhD candidate in Simon Fraser University, Canada right now.
Yes, thank you, Andrew, and also thank you to all the presenters and editors for this amazing intellectual discussion we have here today. So it's really exciting to see how language education is paying more attention to plurilingualism and multilingualism, and see the potential of language repertoire of learners, especially in Sub-Saharan context, sorry. And so I have a very general question for the editors. I'm just wondering, how did you come up with these amazing ideas of exploring the multilingualism in this context?
The editors.
Oh, I think my internet connection is not stable, right?
Yeah, no, I think, I don't know. John, do you want to say anything? I mean, you've been working on this for so long. I mean, it just seems so obvious to teach learners in the languages that they speak and understand best. And I guess also, I mean, UNESCO has been supporting this idea since the 1950s, but the reality keeps coming back to post-colonial languages being used as a language of instruction. I don't know if anybody else can say something to that.
Well, I have a thought. In Africa, it seems to me that you have to have quality teacher training, and that is costly, but producing textbooks in many languages, I think that's a big challenge for us, and I really do hope the World Bank helps.
I have a thought as well. I think formal education follows the model of homogenized language. And if we look at in multilingual contexts, people use language in fluid ways, and most languages in the Global South have not been standardized. Or if they have been standardized, that was part of the colonial project. But if you choose one standard variety in a diverse, fluid communicative context, you actually disown the speakers, and you disown all the speakers who speak other forms of that language. And this is why the post-colonial standard languages just keep the monopoly. First of all, because they already have this huge global prestige. I mean, by speaking English, we are actually contributing to that prestige, and by publishing internationally in English, and in a handful of other languages, which also are more and more becoming marginalized. But secondly, a model of language that privileges only one type of speaker, that turns multilingualism into a burden, and people are not buying that. If you have to be multilingual in standard languages, multilingualism is really costly for the speaker. Try to write 5, 6 different standard languages. It's really hard. So we need other models that do not assess forms, but communicative and social competence. And competence even is the wrong word, but you know, in the heat of the moment, I didn't have a better word.
Yes, yes. Connie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll speak from the context of the part of Africa where I come from. There is a lot that is not known, and it is hidden in the indigenous languages. When we switch directly to English, French, Arabic, we lose it all. And therefore, it is important for us to step back and get these languages on board. They communicate. Instead of us translating from English or these other languages, translating the culture into the African culture, it should be the African culture or the indigenous culture interacting with the Western or Eastern culture. In that way, we are going to gain a lot. Look at the recent pandemic of COVID. There are a lot of things that we're able to discover here in Uganda from our bushes that cannot be found in any encyclopedia of science and medicine. Now, all these losses, which goes with the elderly people who are dying off because the young people are being taught outside of their mother tongue, is lost with them as buried. We are looking for some of the ancient books in Western libraries in order to revive the languages, which is quite unfortunate. The earlier we encourage the multilingual translanguaging, the better for the whole world. It's not even a matter of economics or commerce, it is about life and death. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd like to invite her, maybe and Chinghua. Oh, Beth, you want to answer? Yeah.
No, I just wanted to say we should do this again sometime. And it's just so nice to see everyone. And it's so nice to have the conversation. And we probably have to stop because it's been going quite some time, but it's just such a wonderful opportunity. And Angel, you have such great students that it's been so supportive and interested, and so it's really an awesome collaboration.
Maybe you should do volume 3 and volume 4, and also advocacy work like the policy.
Not me.
Policy dialogue events that you have been talking about, and I think we can change the format of the books into the policy dialogue events too. Yeah. So thank you so much, and we are so honored to be the platform for these wonderful researchers to be together, to come together. Thank you, thank you. So I want to thank Chinghua, Chung Hong, Phoebe, everybody, my students' team. They are essential to making this happen too. Thank you so much. So until next time, I don't think this is the end. This is just the beginning of our continuing work in community and in solidarity. Thank you.
Thank
you so much. Lovely to see you all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Keep in touch.
Thank you.
Keep each other too.
Bye-bye.
Keep in touch. Bye.
Cheers. Cheers.
Cheers.